She said it loud enough for the whole cafe to hear. Go back to Africa. Her voice was smug, entitled, like the world owed her something. But Jason Statham didn't flinch. He turned slowly, calm as ever, and then he spoke. What he said next didn't just silence the woman. It stunned every single person in the room. Hate only works when it finds someone afraid to speak. And I've never been afraid of truth. Jason Statham was never supposed to be part of this moment. But now he was the moment. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Jason Statham walked into the cafe the way he did everything. Quietly, deliberately, without needing to prove a thing. The place was called Gracie's Porch, tucked off a back road in a small southern town most GPS apps didn't even label right. No paparazzi here. No flashing lights. Just chipped brick walls, sweet tea, and the sound of ceiling fans humming like lazy bees in summer heat. He didn't come for attention. He came for quiet. A bell above the door jingled as he stepped in. A few heads turned, then quickly looked away. They recognized him. How could they not? But Jason carried an energy that asked for space, not selfies. People respected that. He gave a nod to the woman behind the counter, took his coffee black, and sat at the far table near the window where the sun poured in soft and golden. There was a rhythm to this place. Locals moved slow. Conversations ran on trust, not speed. In one corner, two older men played checkers without a single word. Near the front, a teenage boy hunched over a history book, lips moving silently as he tried to sound out a sentence. Jason watched him for a moment, his eyes steady but kind. He noticed everything. That's just how he was built. At the counter stood a young man, early 20s, maybe, black, tall, clean-shaven, nervous in the kind of way that comes from growing up with eyes always on you. He was polite, careful, every movement calculated, like he'd trained himself not to make people uncomfortable just by existing. Jason knew that look. He'd seen it before in places a lot rougher than this. People who had earned comfort in rooms that didn't want to give it. The young man was handing over a coffee to a customer when the trouble walked in. She was dressed like money. The kind of money that was old enough to forget where it came from. White blouse, gold bracelets, lipstick too red for morning. The heels clicked across the floor like a warning. Jason didn't look up. Not yet. She approached the counter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The young man greeted her kindly. Good morning, ma'am. What can I get started for you? She blinked like she hadn't expected him to speak. Jason could feel the shift without even turning his head. The temperature in the room changed. A crack in the air. I'd like a cinnamon roll, the woman said, but not from him. Silence. The young man froze mid-motion. His hand hovered near the pastry case. The girl behind him, a high school kid with freckles and braces, looked at the woman, confused. I'm sorry, she asked. You heard me, the woman said, louder now. I don't want him touching my food. Jason's hand tightened slightly around his mug. Still didn't move. Still just listened. The woman's tone curled like smoke, sweet on the outside, but laced with poison. I'm not trying to be rude. I just have a right to feel comfortable. The freckles on the girl's face darkened as her expression turned. The boy behind the counter was still standing, silent, his hands now resting on the register, like they were the only thing holding him up. I can grab the cinnamon roll, the girl offered quietly. Jason finally looked up. He didn't say a word, just looked, and what he saw was something that never stopped getting to him. A young man made small by someone else's fear pretending to be power. A staff forced to tiptoe around cruelty. A room full of people who weren't sure what to do. So they did nothing. He hated that. The woman sat 2 tables down, still wearing that smug look of hers. She took a sip from her coffee and winced. It's too hot. Of course it is. Jason exhaled slowly. The boy at the counter tried to smile again. Sorry, ma'am. I'll make another. No, she snapped. I'll wait for someone else to do it. Someone who belongs here. Jason blinked once. He could have stood up then. Could have said a dozen things. But he knew people like her. They thrived off reaction. Off anger. That wasn't the way. Instead, He leaned back slightly, rested his hand on the edge of the table, and waited, not because he was afraid, because the moment hadn't come yet. But when it did, she'd never forget it. And neither would anyone else in that cafe. The cafe was holding its breath. Jason Statham sat motionless, his eyes fixed on a woman who hadn't stopped complaining since she walked in. Some people are loud with their ignorance. Others, like her, wrapped it in pearls and perfume. But the damage was the same. She leaned across her table now, waving her manicured hand toward the girl behind the counter. "Is someone else available to help me?" she said, voice coated in fake patience. "This isn't a race thing. I just think it's inappropriate to have him out front." The girl's face went pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Jason heard the slight gasp from the teenager studying in the corner. He watched the way the older checker players paused their game, their hands frozen over the board like the moment demanded stillness. The boy behind the counter. He didn't look up. He just stared at the floor, swallowing something heavier than pride. Jason's jaw flexed once. Then came the moment. The woman, loud enough for every soul in the building to hear, turned toward the boy and said like a curse disguised as suggestion, "Why don't you go back to Africa?" You could feel it leave her mouth. Heavy, rotten. It dropped into the air like a dead thing. Forks stopped moving. Coffee mugs hovered midair. Someone let out a low, drawn-out oof from the back. Jason stood. The sound of the chair dragging back across the floor echoed like a storm rolling in from far away. Slow, heavy, undeniable. Every pair of eyes turned to him now, not because of who he was, but because of how he stood. Not angry, not flustered, grounded. Jason walked the counter. Not fast, not slow, just certain, like the ground belonged to him. Like injustice never had a chance of standing tall. When he was near, he looked at the boy first. "You okay?" he asked, voice low, calm, direct. The young man nodded quickly, but his breath hitched. "Yeah," he said, "I'm fine." Jason studied his face a second longer. No, he wasn't fine. He was surviving, holding back, doing what people always told him to do. Let it slide. Then Jason turned. He faced a woman without a trace of hostility, but with a weight that made her lean back involuntarily. "I heard what you said," Jason told her. She laughed, high and dismissive. "I didn't mean it like that." Jason tilted his head. "Like what, then?" The room leaned in with him. No one said a word. "I just meant he'd probably be happier somewhere else," she stammered, her voice cracking slightly now. "With his own people." Jason nodded once, slow, then looked her in the eyes. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Where are you from?" She blinked. "I was born here." Jason pointed behind him toward the young man. "So was he." The woman's lips pressed into a hard line. "It's not the same." "Why?" Jason asked. The word hit like a gavel. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "This is just... You're twisting what I meant." Jason stepped forward, not threatening, just undeniable. "You said what you meant. You just didn't expect anyone to call you on it." The silence in the cafe was sharp now, razor thin, and every person in that room could feel something cracking. Old assumptions, old excuses, old habits. Jason looked around. Not at her anymore. At them. "At some point," he said, "we all have to decide what kind of silence we're willing to live with. Some of you heard what she said and didn't blink. That's a choice, just like standing up is a choice." He glanced back at the young man behind the counter. He showed up today to do a job. He was polite, respectful, gave more patience than she deserved. And still, she decided to cut him down. The woman shifted in her seat, trying to find ground that no longer existed. Jason's voice dropped even lower, softer, stronger. "You don't get to decorate hate and call it manners." The words rang out like a bell. People started nodding. One of the checker players muttered, "Amen." Another woman near the sugar stand dabbed her eyes. The tension didn't vanish. It transformed, from fear into clarity, from awkwardness into accountability. And Jason just stood there, not for applause, not for recognition, for truth. Jason Statham didn't blink. The woman across from him sat frozen, her fingers wrapped tight around her designer handbag, like a protector from the moment she created. But Jason didn't care about her discomfort. Not today. Not anymore. He stepped back just slightly and asked the simplest, most dangerous question he could have asked. What are you really afraid of? She didn't answer. Couldn't. So he did. You're not afraid of him, Jason said, gesturing toward the young man behind the counter. You're afraid of seeing someone rise without needing your permission. The cafe was silent again, but this time it was different. The kind of silence where people listened. You want to talk about belonging? Jason continued. Let's talk about that. Because what I've seen, what I know, is that belonging isn't about skin. It's about who shows up with heart, with humility, with hands willing to work. He paused, letting the weight of that settle. He belongs more than you do right now. Because he didn't walk in here thinking the world owed him anything. He just wanted to do his job, to serve people who'd look him in the eye. Jason turned and looked at the rest of the room. One by one, a teenage girl with a messy ponytail, an old couple holding hands. The boy still hunched over his history book, eyes wide like he was seeing something no textbook ever taught him. Jason's voice dropped, almost like a whisper. I've trained soldiers, sat with kids in hospital beds, buried friends who wore uniforms and didn't get to come home. And let me tell you something I learned the hard way. He turned back to the woman. Hate only works when it finds someone afraid to speak. She opened her mouth again, trying to recover some scrap of control. I was just expressing an opinion. No, Jason said, cutting her off gently but firmly. You were measuring someone's worth by your own discomfort. Then quieter, and that's not an opinion. That's a sickness. A hush fell over the cafe again. People weren't just watching now. They were feeling it, like a temperature shift deep in the bones. Jason breathed in slowly. You know what I see when I look at him? He turned to the young man again. I see someone who knows how to hold grace under fire. Someone who's already had to live through more than you've ever imagined, and still shows up with respect. He smiled just barely, and that takes strength. The young man lowered his eyes, but not from shame, from something else. Something like dignity, like relief. Jason looked back at the woman, his tone softening slightly. Not to forgive her, but to give her a chance she didn't deserve. If you live your whole life thinking the world looks better when some people are made smaller, it's time to unlearn that. He let the words hang there. That's not tradition. That's rot. Across the room, an elderly man pushed back his chair and stood slowly. His voice was gravel, deep and sure. He's right. One by one, others nodded. Someone clapped once, awkwardly. Then again. Then it spread, a slow ripple of hands meeting hands. Not for performance, but for truth. Jason didn't smile. He didn't need to. He turned back to the young man and said, You showed up with grace. Don't ever let people like her make you forget that. The woman stood now too, but for all the wrong reasons. Her hands shook as she grabbed her purse, muttering something under her breath, an exit wound of pride. No one stopped her. No one even looked her way as she stormed out the door. The sound of it slamming shut echoed like a punctuation mark. Then silence. Then breath. Jason stepped back toward his table. No drama. No theatrics. Just a man who had said what needed to be said. The young man behind the counter stood a little taller. His chest rose as he exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. A woman near the door called out gently, What's your name, son? Malik, he said, voice strong now. Well, Malik, she said with a warm smile, you handled that like a man raised right. He smiled for real that time, and the room did, too. Jason sat back down, picked up his coffee, and sipped it like nothing had happened. But something had happened, something permanent. The cafe breathed again, but not like before. There was something different in the air now. Not just relief, not just quiet, something deeper, like everyone inside had just woken up to the weight of their own silence. Jason Statham sat still, his coffee cooling untouched in front of him. His eyes weren't on the woman anymore. She was gone. What mattered now was what remained. He looked back to Malik, who was wiping down the counter even though there was nothing left to clean. Jason could see it. The way people shrink after surviving something ugly, not because they're weak, but because they've had to carry the ugly alone for too long. Jason stood again, this time slower, not because he was tired, but because every word he was about to say mattered. He turned to the room, his voice steady and low. "Can I ask you all something?" Heads turned, eyes lifted. No one said a word, but the air leaned toward him. Jason pointed gently toward Malik. "Have you ever walked into a room and known you weren't welcome before you even spoke?" Nobody answered, but their faces did. Shame has a way of showing up without permission. Jason continued, "Have you ever had to prove you belong just to stand still?" Still silence. But something was cracking. Something invisible. Something old. He stepped forward slightly. "Because I have. Not for my skin, but for my choices, my past, the things people assumed when they didn't know me." He looked at the boy with the history book. "You ever feel like that?" The boy nodded slowly. Jason looked back at the others. "We teach people how to treat others by what we let slide. And too many people in this country," he paused, "too many people think staying quiet is the same thing as staying neutral." He let that sit, let it sting. Neutral doesn't protect the victim. It protects the one doing the damage. A quiet came from the older checker player in the back. The kind of sound that comes from a man who's lived through things. Jason turned back to Malik, locking eyes with him now. "You were calm. You stayed standing. You kept your voice. That's not weakness. That's control." Malik's chin lifted, just a little. Jason nodded, like the two of them shared some private understanding. And then he turned one final time back to the rest of the cafe. "I'm not from here. I don't know your politics. I don't care what's on your lawn signs or your bumper stickers." He leaned in slightly, his voice now something between a whisper and a promise. "But I know this. Character isn't tested when it's easy to be kind. It's tested when it costs you something." A long beat passed. Then, slowly, an older woman with tight gray curls and a soft southern drawl stood up near the counter. She looked at Malik, then at Jason, and said gently, "We owe you an apology, son." Malik's lips parted. No words, just shock. "You deserve better than what we gave you," she said. Then another voice, this time from a teenage girl near the back. "You do a great job here. I never said it, but I always noticed." Malik's throat moved as he swallowed hard. Jason stood off to the side now, saying nothing, just watching a new moment unfold. A moment Malik owned. The girl behind the register, the one with freckles and braces, reached under the counter and pulled out a sticky note. She scribbled something, then handed it to Malik. He looked at it, smiled, and slipped it in his pocket. Jason caught his eye and nodded. That's when the cafe owner walked in, finally arriving after being called in by staff. He took one look at the atmosphere, the crowd, the tension turned into warmth, and walked straight over to Malik. "Can we talk?" the owner said, motioning toward the back. Malik hesitated. Jason spoke, quietly, just to him. "Go ahead. They're not going to ask you to shrink anymore." Malik walked off with the owner. Jason sat back down. He didn't need applause, didn't want credit. What he wanted was for people to remember. Have you ever been in a moment where someone chose to speak truth instead of staying silent? What did it change for them or for you? Drop your story below. Your voice matters here. The door to the back office clicked shut behind Malik. The cafe buzzed softly now, not with tension, but with movement. People shifted in their chairs. Conversations trickled back in. It felt like someone had opened a window and let in fresh air, the kind that makes people sit up straighter, without knowing why. Jason Statham stayed seated. He didn't need to be part of the aftermath. He was the turning point. But even so, he watched carefully, like a man who understood that healing isn't loud. It's in the in-between moments, the ones people don't film. Minutes passed. Then Malik came back out. His steps were slower, but grounded. Different. He wasn't glancing at the floor anymore. He wasn't apologizing with his posture. He walked like someone who had just heard the most important sentence of his life and believed it. The cafe owner followed him, middle-aged, red in the face, not from anger, but from something closer to regret. He clapped a hand on Malik's shoulder and raised his voice just enough to be heard. This young man's been working here 2 years. Never missed a shift. Never raised his voice. Never gave me a single reason not to trust him with this place. A beat. The room leaned in. Well, starting next week, the owner said he's not just working the register anymore. Malik's stepping into a lead role. Full pay bump. Management track. You could hear the inhale ripple across the room. Then came the applause. This time it wasn't awkward. It wasn't hesitant. It was earned. Malik looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So he just smiled and nodded, eyes glassy but proud. Jason finally stood again. He walked over, quiet but unmistakable, and held out his hand. Malik gripped it tight. Jason leaned in slightly. Don't let them change your shape to fit their comfort. You understand? Malik nodded. I do now. Jason gave a half smile. Good. Then I did my part. He turned to leave, but Malik's voice stopped him. Why did you even say something? You didn't have to get involved. Jason looked back, his expression soft, but firm, because silence would have felt like permission. A pause. And I don't hand out permission slips for hate. He clapped Malik once on the shoulder and made his way toward the door. But before he could leave, someone else approached him. It was a teenage boy, the one with the history book. He looked nervous, but determined. Hey, sir? Jason turned patient. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide. You really shut her down, he said. Like completely. Jason gave a small shrug. Didn't shut her down. Just showed people what she really sounded like when no one nodded along. The boy's brow furrowed, thinking. Jason pointed at the book in his hand. History teaches facts, but real life, that teaches voice. What do you mean? I mean knowing what's right is enough. You gotta decide if you're willing to carry it when it's inconvenient. The boy nodded slowly, like it was sinking in layer by layer. Jason tilted his head. You ever need someone to tell you when to speak up? The boy hesitated. Sometimes. Jason gave him a steady look. You don't anymore. The boy didn't say anything. He just stood taller. The kind of taller that doesn't show up in your height. It shows up in your spine. Jason finally stepped out onto the porch, the warm breeze brushing against his face. The town was quiet out here. Still, he looked out toward the horizon. Not for any dramatic reason, just because peace looks different when it's earned. From inside the cafe, he could hear the conversations picking back up, someone laughing, someone calling Malik's name. He didn't need to turn around to know the atmosphere had changed. He could feel it. And the truth was, it didn't take a courtroom speech. It didn't take a crowd. Just one man, one moment. And a decision to say what everyone else was too afraid to. That's all it ever takes. One person choosing humanity over habit. Jason walked off the porch. Not as a hero. Not as a celebrity. Just a man who knew that silence can be louder than hate. And he refused to stay quiet. The cafe never went back to normal. It became something better. The next morning, Malik showed up early, earlier than anyone expected. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was walking into a place where he had to shrink just to fit in. The regulars greeted him differently now. Not with pity, not with politeness, with respect. Eye contact, first names. Real conversation. Something had shifted, and though no one said outright, they all felt it. Jason Statham had walked in and pulled the thread on something much bigger than one rude woman's words. He'd exposed a quiet rot and demanded light. Malik moved to the cafe like a man reclaiming space that was always his. He gave out orders, checked on the team, even adjusted the tip jar near the register, now with his name beside it. Small changes. Big meaning. At the window table, the boy with the history book returned the next afternoon. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought his younger sister, ordered 2 lemonades, and told her, "You'll like it here." She looked around, curious. Malik brought their drinks over himself. "You must be her big brother," he said. The boy beamed. "Yeah." Malik smiled. "That's a good job to have." Meanwhile, taped to the bulletin board near the front, a new handwritten sign appeared. No announcement, just 6 words. "Respect is the only uniform required." No one had to ask who wrote it. The handwriting was unmistakable, Jason's. Blocky, sharp, quietly powerful. He'd left it behind, folded between a $10 tip and a napkin. The note stayed there. No one touched it. They didn't frame it, didn't laminate it. That would have ruined the point. It wasn't meant to be displayed. It was meant to be lived. That week, more people came through the doors than usual. Locals who'd heard something had happened. They didn't know the full story, just that someone had said something cruel, and someone else had said enough. And the man who said it, he wasn't there for the applause. He had long since disappeared, just the way he came in. No post, no headline, no spotlight, but his presence lingered, in the way Malik walked, in the way the staff held their heads higher, in the way the regulars now checked their own words a little closer before they left their mouths. Jason hadn't come to save anyone. He came to remind them who they already were. And then he walked away. It started with a single sentence, filmed on a shaky phone, halfway hidden behind a coffee cup. Jason Statham standing tall, voice calm, eyes locked on the woman as he said, "You don't get to decorate hate and call it manners." The clip hit the internet that night. No title card, no hashtags, no captions trying to make it trend. Just a moment, raw, uncut, real. It didn't matter that Jason never looked at the camera, never performed. That's what made it different. This wasn't a stunt. It was a line in the sand drawn by a man who didn't ask for attention. He commanded it, simply by refusing to look away. The video spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't viral in the usual sense. It was heavy, shared quietly in group texts, in staff meetings, in classrooms, passed from one soul to another like a reminder of what strength actually looks like. People watched, paused, and rewatched. They didn't cheer. They reflected. In comment sections across the web, strangers shared their own stories. Times they stayed quiet. Times they spoke up. Times they wished they had. No one debated what Jason said, because there was nothing to argue, just truth laid bare. Malik never posted about it. He didn't need to. The next week, 2 more young men applied to work at Gracie's porch, both of them black. Both of them told the cafe owner, "It feels different here now." And it did. Even the checker players, who hadn't changed tables in 30 years, started sitting near the counter, closer to Malik, just to be near whatever that was. A shift had happened. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. Somewhere on a quiet road, far from town, Jason Statham drove alone, windows cracked, radio off. He wasn't thinking about the clip, or the headlines, or the praise. He was thinking about Malik, about that boy with a history book, about how sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is not walk away. Jason never saw himself as a teacher, but the world had taught him one thing. When the moment calls you, you answer, not for show, for truth. And if even one person saw what happened in that cafe and decided to carry that truth into their next moment, then it was worth it. Because the fight against hate doesn't need heroes. It needs witnesses who won't stay silent.